This is not really an opening remark. This is more by way of welcoming you all to this forum. We in ORF see ourselves as facilitators for a discussion of getting you all together here in this room, more to listen, more to engage with ideas which you all put forward in this gathering. I mean, 2 years were terrible. We were held captive by our screens, no personal interaction. So it's such a pleasure to see people, meet them face to face once again, and have conversations with real people and not with pixels on a screen. So welcome to this forum. This is, it's been titled India at 75 in a Multipolar World. But what we really gathered here to discuss is, this important upcoming presidency 2022 December, which India takes over, of the G20. To pick your brains as to what are the ideas, the way forward, what can be done, what should be done, what are the thought processes. The founding of the G20 itself was, if you look at the history, a breakthrough movement when the big powers realized that there were other fish in the pond. 1999, the Asian financial crisis. That is how it had its beginnings, as a group of finance ministers and central bank heads of the G20 countries, including the EU, which became the 20th member. And from then, we moved on to 2008, and you had the financial crisis, which hit the world, the big economic shock, when this was upgraded to a head of state forum. It became weightier, it had more muscle, and it took some of the most coordinated action at that point of time in the next 3 years to get over some of the aftershocks of the economic crisis. That is where its real success lay. Then it started faltering, then it started weakening. Now today we are back in a moment, I think, which is unprecedented. We are at a time when lots of things have been happening in the world. In fact, the world order seems in shambles. It seems to be broken at this particular point in time. And in 2022, India at 75 is waiting in the wings to take over the presidency for the first time, when the very idea of a community of nations, the idea of multilateralism itself, faces an unprecedented challenge. And indeed, the challenge is such that we seem to be on a downhill slide towards a watershed, which you do not know where the bottom will be reached. It is indeed a moment of crisis. It's a moment of crisis for the global community, for the global financial system, and for multilateralism itself. And yes, 2020 did come as a big rupture. The effect of COVID had already been devastating in most economies. Supply chains, the real world had broken down. Growth was hit. And then just as we were hoping for the cycle to turn, comes the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine. And the consequences of this particular violation of Article 2(4) of the UN Charter have unleashed a perfect storm that has battered the global economy. And now the World Bank projects that global growth is likely to slow from the post-COVID recovery figure of 5.7% in 2021 to 2.9%, and just about may barely average, it's very unclear, about 3% 23-24. Well, people may want to call it a recession, people may not want to call it a recession. There are a lot of politics around that in the big economies as well. But this is the sharpest deceleration in 80 years, following a brief recovery in 2021. And we are seeing the global funding environment turn extremely adverse, even as countries around us are out chasing the IMF and other multilateral lending institutions. US debt has already crossed $30 trillion. We are ourselves struggling with a fiscal deficit which has been nudging up closer to 7%. And the shockwaves of inflation, which has been caused by the ongoing energy crisis, are making for very fractious, fragmented, and contentious monetary and fiscal action, which will need to be coordinated in the time to come is going to be extremely important. And this is the time of flux when India will be taking leadership of this forum. So, yes, there is a crisis of multilateralism, and simply spelled, the community of nations is finding it increasingly difficult to sustain an international order where some situations trigger billions in spending on weapons and humanitarian aid, and other crises barely elicit a murmur from diplomatic circles. A rules-based international order cannot be one that has a selective response to these kinds of crises. And the ever-expanding and unconstrained resort to economic warfare, the willingness to weaponize everything, from the global banking system to food grains to gas to energy, everything is set to take a terrible toll on the global economy. And at a time such as this, when sanctions are visibly having huge political and economic costs for unrelated third parties, the debate over their legality, their effectiveness, and the collateral costs of these actions is long overdue. And on this issue itself, nations are in disarray. I mean, there is a coalition of the willing and a coalition of the half-willing, which does not have on board several developing countries. And it is not just key players like China and India. Even allies like Turkey and Israel have their own ideas about what to do with these sanctions, where they should go. So you are in a situation where many do not share the same views on international law, on international order, on how this system is to be conducted. So we are reaching a watershed moment, and watershed moments actually give us ground for hope simply because things can't get any worse. If they can't get any worse, they have to get better. Watershed moments are therefore moments of resurgence, and this is the time when we are stepping into this presidency. More than ever, there is a need to step up coordinated efforts to tackle the infirmities, the lack of preparedness which was exposed by COVID, the lack of preparedness in health infrastructure, the inequalities in the health system across the world, in the responses which countries gave to the pandemic. Yes, we're in a situation where the days of unlimited quantities of magic monopoly money are over. It does not work that way anymore. We are in a situation where there is going to be need, we're in a situation of rising interest rates, and there's a need to mutually discuss and plan adjustments to fiscal and monetary policy across the world. Local concerns about the unintended consequences of action taken by major powers are real. And the unintended consequences can be disastrous. They can trigger off excessive risk-taking, market volatility, which can knock the bottom out of many economies across the world. And therefore, at this time, there's a need to step up support to vulnerable geographies. It becomes paramount. It is not paramount just as a humanitarian crisis or as a measure of aid. It has today become a global security imperative. Now, failure on this front will only multiply the number of fragile, ungoverned spaces, giving plenty of fresh headroom to disruptive groups. We've seen many of them across the world. New groups, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, these things can only increase their presence, which then unleashes waves of disaffection, instability, and migrants that no border guards can be equipped to handle. And let's be very clear about that. Success, therefore, depends on identifying what really matters and the gravity with which it can be captured as part of the forthcoming agenda of the G20. And ideation plays an extremely important role. Ideas which come out from groups such as these. It is important to identify our own ambitions, India's ambitions, regional ambitions, and global ambitions going forward. The purpose of this meeting, as Samir said, is to nurture this community of ideas. We had a hiatus for about 2 years, but we believe that the Indian Think Tank Forum is an extremely vibrant platform where these ideas can be discussed, should be taken up. We have shaped the forum around you all, And thank you all for coming here. But we will also have a number of track one speakers who will be talking to us. Ambassador Shringla will be addressing us this evening. And then we have Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra talking about India's G20 steps later tomorrow. Mr. Amitabh Khan will also be interacting with us. So there is, by the end of this forum, I hope we would have had a chance to hear a diversity of voices from across the country. Not just Delhi, not just Mumbai, but across the country to deliberate and think in terms of new partnerships that we can manage, create between ourselves going forward. All the best for the next 1.5 days, and let us begin.